Hello, my name's Iris. My mom said she needed a place to stay, just for a while. I said yes, because that's what daughters do, right? But she didn't come alone. She brought him, her boyfriend, unemployed, entitled. And by the end of the week, he was sitting on my couch like he owned the place. By the second week, my name was scratched off the fridge, my father's photo was in the trash, and I found out they'd started filing paperwork without me. They called me the stable one, and then used that to gut my life from the inside out. So I did what no one expected. I took everything. But do you know what still keeps me up at night? It wasn't what they took. It's how quietly they thought I'd let it happen. Would you have stayed? The air inside my condo still smelled like new paint and eucalyptus cleaner. That morning, sunlight filtered through my kitchen blinds in long, golden stripes, and for a moment, it felt like peace had finally taken a seat at my table. I was barefoot, watering the little row of succulents on the windowsill, humming without realizing it. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every scent, every inch of space. It was mine. After years of renting rooms, sleeping with earplugs, and tiptoeing around other people's noise, this silence, was freedom. I took a slow sip from my coffee mug and leaned against the counter. A breath, then another. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for anything. That's when my phone buzzed. "Hey, baby," my mother's voice sang from the speaker, sticky sweet like syrup. "Listen, I was wondering if I could stay with you for just a little while, just until I get some things settled." My stomach dropped. Not because she asked, it wasn't the first time, but because I could already hear what was coming next. And still, like a fool, I asked, "Just you?" She laughed. "Of course, sweetheart. Just me. It'll be temporary." Promise. I looked around my freshly curated apartment, the gray walls I picked myself, the couch I'd waited months to afford. My eyes rested on the closed door to the guest room. Empty. Ready. My mistake. I opened it. "Fine," I said. "Just a couple weeks." I should have known better. With my mom, temporary had no expiration date, and just me usually meant plus whatever chaos she'd invited into her life that month. 2 days later, the doorbell rang. I had just come out of the shower, hair wrapped in a towel, a half-unbuttoned shirt hanging off one shoulder. I peeked through the peephole. It wasn't just her. There he was. Randall, cargo shorts, 2 oversized duffel bags, a Bluetooth speaker clipped to his belt loop, playing something with too much bass for 9 in the morning, and my mother, standing beside him, grinning like she'd just brought home a puppy. "Iris! Surprise!" I opened the door, slowly. My towel was still damp against my neck. Randall stepped forward immediately, like the threshold was an invitation. "Hey there," he said, already halfway inside. "This place is nice, really nice." He dropped his bags onto my couch like it was a hotel lobby. My mother kissed my cheek as if I wasn't frozen in the doorway, mouth half open. "You remember Randall, don't you?" she said, brushing past me. "He's just gonna stay here a while with me. Things got a little messy with his apartment." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I didn't trust myself to say it without screaming. Instead, I watched as Randall kicked off his shoes, on my rug, and flopped onto the couch, letting out a satisfied sigh. "Feels like home already," he said, smiling up at the ceiling fan. That sentence sat heavy in the room, heavier than any of their luggage. That afternoon, I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. "It's temporary," I repeated in my head. "Just breathe." "You said yes to your mom, not to Randall. Maybe he'd be gone in a week. Maybe." By dinner time, I knew better. He'd taken over the living room, pulled the coffee table closer to him without asking, and connected his speaker to the TV. Some podcast blared loudly while he laughed at jokes only he understood. My mother, meanwhile, unpacked groceries from a plastic bag. "Iris," she said, "I hope you don't mind. I used your card. Just grabbed a few things we needed." I blinked. "My card?" She waved it off. "You always say I can use it in an emergency." "What was the emergency exactly?" I asked. She didn't answer. Randall turned up the volume. Later that night, the guest room door was closed and the hallway light was on. I sat on my couch, the same spot where Randall had dumped his stuff earlier, and tried to read a book. But every few seconds, I could hear him snoring through the thin wall. Not just snoring, snorting. It was the kind of sound that made your skin crawl, irregular and loud. I got up, walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood in the dark. The apartment felt different already, less mine, more invaded. I hadn't agreed to this. I hadn't said yes to Randall. I hadn't said yes to my mother rewriting the rules on the fly. But I also hadn't said no. That was the problem. I used to think the loudest betrayals came with screaming, with slammed doors and curse words. But some betrayals, they sneak in with duffel bags and Bluetooth speakers. They settle on your couch. They sip from your mugs. They borrow your peace. That night, I didn't sleep in my bed. I didn't even try. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned, slower than usual, slower than I remembered. I thought about saying something, about setting rules, about demanding answers. Instead, I whispered into the quiet, "This is still my home." But even I didn't believe it. By the time morning came, the corners of my apartment already felt different. The silence I had worked so hard to protect was gone, scratched away by snoring, heavy footsteps, and someone else's voice rising from the television I used to watch alone. I walked toward the kitchen, still rubbing sleep out of my eyes. My sock caught on something, Randall's sneakers, right in the middle of the hallway. One flipped sideways like he'd stepped out of them mid-walk and never bothered to look back. I stepped over them and kept going. In the kitchen, a pan still slick with oil sat on the stove. A half-eaten slice of cold pizza rested on a plate nearby. The fridge door was cracked open. Randall's energy drink, half full, stood guard next to my almond milk. I didn't say anything. I just closed the fridge, rinsed the pan, and wiped the counter in tight, quiet circles. This wasn't cohabitation. It was an occupation, and somehow I'd surrendered the lease. I walked past the living room and paused. My bookshelf, the one I'd arranged by color and author, not for aesthetics, but because it made me feel calm, was empty. Books were piled into a cardboard box that sat on the floor like someone had packed me up without notice. The top was labeled, Iris. Stuff? Randall was in the middle of setting up what looked like a gamer's paradise. 2 monitors blinked on the coffee table. Wires curled across the rug. A folding table from God knows where had taken my ottoman's spot. I stood still, not moving, just watching. I wasn't sure if I was more stunned or numb. He noticed me then. "Oh, hey," he said, casually. "Hope it's cool I moved a few things. Your books were kinda in the way. Figured you didn't read 'em much anyway." I blinked. That was it. No question, no apology, no curiosity about whether I was okay with my personal space being rearranged. Just the assumption, his comfort prioritized over mine. I said nothing. Not because I didn't want to speak, but because I didn't trust the version of my voice that might come out. Instead, I walked to the box, opened the flap, and ran my fingers over the spines of novels I'd collected since college. They were dusty now, folded wrong. One of the hardcovers had a torn sleeve. It wasn't just a bookshelf that was gone. It was the reminder that I used to take up space here, without permission. That evening, Vera and Randall returned from grocery shopping. I wasn't asked if we needed anything. I didn't even know they'd gone out. My mother dropped plastic bags on the counter and handed me the receipt. "You've got your card on file, right, sweetheart?" she said. "It's easier this way." I didn't respond. Randall opened a soda and leaned against the fridge, chewing like he was enjoying the silence more than I was. I sorted through the receipt. Eggs, 3 types of chips, beer, a frozen meatloaf I'd never eat, scented candles that smelled like something between cologne and regret. My mother caught my eye. "Don't be so serious, Iris. You've always been the stable one. You can handle a little extra, can't you?" That word again, stable, like a compliment that doubled as a shackle. I stared at the receipt, then quietly placed it in my drawer, along with the rest of my monthly expenses. No reaction, just memory. 2 days later, while working from home, I logged into a Zoom meeting with my headset on, hoping to salvage some control over my week. Randall had decided to rearrange the living room to improve his connection. He moved the Wi-Fi router and now sat near the entryway with both monitors blinking like he was live streaming his own version of comfort. The call started. My manager greeted the team. Then, from Randall's direction, the screeching sound of a car crash compilation pierced through the air, followed by his laughter. One of my coworkers smiled awkwardly through the camera. Iris? Is someone watching NASCAR wrecks in your living room? I wanted to laugh. Instead, I clicked mute and let my screen go black. This wasn't background noise, this was intrusion made visible. After the call, I stared at my blank screen. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I picked up my old notebook from the side drawer, the one I hadn't used since budgeting my down payment. On the top of a fresh page, I wrote in capital letters, "What I pay for." Underneath, I began listing every item: rent, Wi-Fi, water, electricity, groceries, furniture, streaming services, appliances, random fix-it items, light bulbs, hand soap. Every line felt like a boundary being reclaimed. That night, while Randall watched TV at full volume, I found myself tracing the edges of my couch, the one I bought after my first promotion. I'd saved 6 months for it, and I'd chosen the fabric with care. A soft charcoal gray, firm cushions, modern legs. I remembered lying on it the first week I moved in, finally breathing. That memory felt stolen now, not just blurred, but overwritten by someone else's comfort. I got up, walked to my closet, and pulled out the receipt folder. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I knew why I was doing it. Something inside me had shifted, quietly, irrevocably. They wanted me to support him? Fine. Let's start counting. Support, after all, comes with receipts. By Thursday, my dining table had transformed into something resembling a forensic accounting station. Every bill, every digital transaction, every grocery delivery I'd ordered since the day they moved in, sorted, printed, highlighted. I bought folders from Office Depot and labeled them like I was preparing for a court case. Utilities, food, cleaning supplies, rent, furniture, random maintenance, all of it. Color-coded tabs helped me track patterns. Red meant recurring charges, green for shared use items, and yellow. Yellow was for everything they consumed but never acknowledged. That pile grew fastest. I sat back with a coffee in hand, black now, no time for cream. It was early, not yet 8 a.m. Randall was still asleep. I knew because the television hadn't come on yet and the air didn't smell like burnt toaster waffles. Facts don't lie. People do. The knock came just as I opened my laptop to finalize the expense spreadsheet. Vera leaned in the doorway holding a plate of scrambled eggs, like we were in some sitcom where families ate together and laughed over breakfast. "Hey, honey," she said, setting the plate down without asking if I'd eaten. "I was thinking, Randall's been having trouble with his unemployment forms. It'd be easier if the lease had his name on it. Just for paperwork, nothing permanent." I stopped typing. My fork hit the plate like a dropped coin. She smiled like this was a perfectly reasonable suggestion. "You know how government stuff is complicated." "Temporary?" I asked, not lifting my eyes from the screen. She nodded. "Of course, just to help him file. It doesn't change anything." The audacity of it was impressive. Not because I didn't expect it, but because she could say something like that while still sipping her tea like nothing had shifted, like she hadn't just asked me to replace myself on my own lease. I didn't argue, I didn't protest. I just let silence settle between us like fog. That's the thing about erasure. It rarely starts with shouting. It begins with suggestion. When she walked away, humming a tune I used to love, I opened a browser and logged into the leasing portal. I wasn't even sure what I expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe I'd catch this before any damage was done. But when I clicked the Tenant Information tab, I saw an Update Submitted notice dated 3 weeks prior, and when I opened the file, it was my name, my address, my unit, my lease, except the form requested to remove me as the primary tenant and listed Randall Murtaugh instead. Vera's email address was used for confirmation, and my signature, slanted, close, but not mine. They hadn't even warned me. I scrolled back, jaw locked. The form had already been flagged in process. That meant it hadn't finalized yet, but it was in motion. Just a matter of time. I stared at the screen until the lines blurred. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. They didn't just want space. They didn't just want food. They wanted a legal rewrite of my reality. They were trying to replace me, on paper, in practice, in every way that mattered. I walked into the hallway and opened the shared filing cabinet. The bottom drawer held mail I rarely touched, stuff Vera tucked away, claiming it was too cluttered for the counter. There it was, the printed application. My name, misspelled once. My signature, crooked, a little too round. The document stank of ink that didn't belong to me. I sat down on the floor right there in the hallway and held the paper in my lap like it had weight. Ice filled my chest, slow and numbing. They wanted me to disappear. I thought back to the day I signed the lease. I'd been sitting in a real estate office downtown, too nervous to smile, clutching a folder of pay stubs and proof of income. The leasing agent was kind, called me Miss Quinn, even though I told her just Iris was fine. When she handed me the keys, I walked to my car and cried, not out of fear, but pride. That signature had meant something. It was proof I'd clawed my way out of a house filled with noise, bad decisions, and the expectation that I'd always be the one to fix everything. And now that signature had been forged to erase me. That night, I stood in the living room holding a framed photo of me and Vera from 2 years ago. It was taken at a coffee shop, a rare day where we smiled and meant it. I looked younger then, naive. I pulled the frame apart and set the photo face down in a drawer. This wasn't about being a daughter anymore. This was about survival. By the time midnight came, I had scanned every financial document, every email, every lease communication into a drive. I made 2 backups, one on the cloud, one on a USB key I'd tape under the kitchen sink later. Then I clicked on the desktop folder I'd previously labeled Bill's Stuff. I renamed it Proof, Legal Ownership Displacement Attempt. Let them come. Let them keep thinking I was silent because I was soft. They erased me on paper. Now I'll write the rest. By the time I opened my eyes the next morning, the light coming in through the blinds felt colder than usual. Not temperature-wise, but emotionally. There was a stillness to it, like the air had decided to stay quiet so I could hear myself think. Except I didn't want to. I pulled on my robe, tied it at the waist, and stepped into the hallway. The apartment had the scent of stale takeout, mixed with whatever cologne Randall thought was appropriate to wear while lounging shirtless in someone else's home. I made my way toward the kitchen, passing the living room, Randall's temporary throne. He lay sprawled on the couch, one arm hanging over the side, a pillow tucked under his shoulder like he lived there. Because at this point, he pretty much did. The sound of his snoring echoed softly off the walls. I used to wake to birdsong. Now, it was him, breathing heavy, unbothered. In the kitchen, I reached for the cabinet above the sink. I wanted my coffee mug, the one with my initials on it. It wasn't there. I checked the dishwasher. Nothing. I finally found it in the sink, unwashed, stained. I set it aside. Then I saw it. The fridge, once covered with sticky notes, my reminders, my grocery lists, my quotes of encouragement, was now stripped bare except for one memo stuck at an angle. It used to say, "Don't forget to be kind to yourself." But someone had scratched out the word yourself and scribbled Randall in thick black Sharpie. I stared at it. My name didn't belong anywhere anymore. I didn't touch it. I didn't pull it down. I just left it there. Like an exhibit in a museum titled, "What Happens When You Say Nothing?" Later that afternoon, while gathering laundry, I passed by the side table in the living room, where I always kept the photo of my father. It was gone. The spot was empty, a faint square of dust showing where it used to sit. I checked the bookshelf. Nothing. Then the TV stand. Then my room, just in case I'd moved it and forgotten. That kind of forgetting would have felt like mercy. Eventually, I found it. In the trash. The frame was cracked. The glass chipped. The photo, creased along the edge, like someone had shoved it in without care. My father's face stared back at me, partially folded under a pizza box and an empty bag of Doritos. I lifted it carefully, as if it still had breath. Randall was sitting at the counter when I turned around. I didn't scream, I didn't raise my voice. I just held up the picture and asked, "Did you throw this away?" He looked over his shoulder, barely registering what was in my hand. "Oh, that?" He shrugged. Didn't know it mattered. Looked old. Behind him, Vera walked in from the hallway, rubbing lotion into her hands like none of this was happening. I turned to her. This was the only photo I had of him. My father. She glanced at the picture, then at me, her face unreadable. "Sweetie, he probably didn't realize it was important. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. Bigger." I felt something crack, not the kind you hear, but the kind you feel in your ribs when something is lost forever. Not just the photo, but what it represented. I walked past them, photo still in hand, and went to my bedroom. I sat on the bed, closed my eyes, and tried to breathe. And then I heard it. Not a sound in the room, but a sound in memory. My dad's voice, from a long time ago. I couldn't recall where we were, maybe the back of his old pickup, maybe just walking back from school, but his voice was clear. "Don't let anyone treat you like an option in your own life." I opened my eyes, and I knew. That night, I tried to salvage the frame. I glued what I could. Replaced the glass with a plastic sleeve from an old binder. It wasn't perfect, but it was intact, just like me. Not untouched, not whole, but still standing. The next morning, over coffee, I brought it up. "I need that frame back," I said, voice even. That was the only picture I had of Dad. Vera didn't flinch. She took a sip of tea, then said, as calmly as if she were reading the weather, "If you're not comfortable with the arrangement, maybe it's time you moved out." I looked at her, fully, not the version of her I wanted to see, not the mother who once sewed buttons on my coat or showed up to my graduation half an hour late, but smiling. I saw her now for what she was, someone who would rather lose her daughter than her convenience. She meant it. She would rather I leave than confront the disruption she brought into my life. My spoon clinked against the edge of my mug. I stood up slowly, pushed in my chair, and nodded. That wasn't a suggestion. That was an eviction slip dressed in motherly concern. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't even cry. Instead, I went to my room, sat at my desk, and opened a new document. Titled it, Contingency Plan. First line, movers, then storage unit options. Next, legal consultation. I wasn't deciding whether to leave anymore. I was planning how to make it matter. I was going to exit this place in a way they would never forget. Not with violence, not with rage, but with evidence. With silence so loud it would echo long after I'd gone. Later that night, before bed, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. I picked up my red lipstick, the one I never wore, and wrote across the mirror, "They wanted me gone. I'll leave nothing behind but silence and a message." The message began the next morning. I woke up before sunrise, the sky still the color of bruised lavender. The lipstick on the mirror had dried overnight, streaked a little from the humidity, but still legible, still red. I looked at it one last time before brushing my teeth. They wanted me gone. I'll leave nothing behind but silence and a message. I meant every word. I moved like a ghost through the hallway, barefoot, careful not to wake Randall, who was predictably passed out on the couch again, a game controller resting on his chest like a badge of mediocrity. The living room looked like it had hosted a frat party for one, open soda cans, crumbs on the rug, a sock draped over the armrest like a lazy flag of conquest. I stepped over it and went to the kitchen. I made coffee without turning on the lights. Habit. I didn't need illumination to know where everything was. I'd designed this kitchen down to the drawer dividers. By the time the machine hissed out its last breath of steam, Randall had stirred. I heard his shuffle down the hallway. He walked into the kitchen, yawning dramatically, and leaned against the counter with a smirk. "Morning, robot," he said, chuckling as he reached for a banana. I blinked. "Sorry?" "You know, the way you keep everything so clean, sterile, all white walls and silence, no music, no mess, like living in a lab." I stayed quiet, sipping my coffee. The mug still had a faint chip near the handle, one Randall had caused last week and never acknowledged. From behind him, Vera entered. She caught the tail end of his joke and let out a light laugh. Oh, come on, she said, glancing my way. She's always been a little rigid. You know how Iris is. I smiled. But it wasn't kind. It was the sort of smile you wear at funerals when someone tells an inappropriate joke. I put my mug down, carefully, and looked at them both. Randall, you're living in my home, I said, each word delivered like a document in court. You don't get to insult me in it. He raised an eyebrow, chewing the banana now, still amused. You're really sensitive, huh? Vera placed her hands on the counter. Don't start a scene. He was teasing. You know he jokes. I looked directly at her. This will be the last week he speaks to me that way, joke or not. Then I picked up my mug and walked away. I spent the next few hours working from my bedroom, trying to ignore the occasional outburst of laughter from the living room, where Randall was watching compilation videos again. People falling, cars spinning out, the usual things that entertained him. But I kept my focus. I sent reports, joined Zoom meetings, answered emails. That afternoon, I went out to grab a package from the mailbox. It was a short walk down to the lobby, and I lingered outside a little longer than necessary. The air felt better out there, less used. When I returned, something felt wrong. I stepped into my room and stopped. Everything was off. Not dramatically, just enough. My closet doors were ajar. Inside, several shirts had been rearranged by color. A box of scarves that used to sit on the top shelf was now on the floor. My desk had been dusted, poorly. A few of my journals were stacked neatly on the nightstand, which I hadn't touched in days. And then I noticed what was missing. The photo of me and my college roommate, one of the few people who'd stayed when things fell apart years ago, wasn't on the shelf. My drawer, where I kept letters from my father, was open slightly, and the stack looked thinned out. I stepped back out into the hallway, heart pounding, not from panic, but from that specific kind of rage that settles deep in your stomach and grows slowly. Vera was folding laundry at the end of the hallway. You went in my room, I said. She didn't look up. I just straightened up a bit. It was dusty. You never organize. You went in my locked room. I used the backup key. It's still my home, too. No, I said quietly. It's not. She turned then, finally, arms crossed, laundry still in her hands. You're being dramatic. I didn't throw anything away. You moved things that weren't yours. You touched letters that weren't for your eyes. You crossed a line that I made very clear. She rolled her eyes. Honestly, Iris, you're overreacting. There it was. The sentence every boundary breaker uses when they're caught. The words meant to gaslight you into silence. I didn't give her that power. That evening, I called a locksmith. I didn't wait for permission, didn't ask if it would bother anyone. I just did it. He arrived just after 6 p.m. While Randall played video games with his headset on and Vera took a bath, I stood beside my bedroom door, arms crossed, watching the lock get replaced. The locksmith handed me the new key. Should I toss the old one? Yes, I said. Please. Once he left, I wrote a note and taped it to my door. If I have to lock my piece away, you are no longer part of it. I didn't hear anything about it for hours. Randall saw the note first and scoffed loud enough for me to hear. Vera walked past it twice and said nothing, pretended it didn't exist. But it was there, and I was already moving behind the scenes. That night, before bed, I stood in the kitchen sipping water. Vera came in to grab something from the fridge. We moved like strangers now. Her robe rustled as she reached for juice. You really going to act like this over a room? She said, not even facing me. I set my glass down. No, I said, not over a room. Over the fact that you've made it very clear who you value here, and it isn't me. She turned then, leaning against the counter. You're being dramatic again. I stepped closer, keeping my voice calm. The next time someone crosses into my space, they'll find it empty. Her expression tightened. Is that a threat? I shook my head. No. It's a promise. And promises, unlike people, deserve to be kept. I didn't wake with urgency that morning. No fire in my chest, no pounding in my ears, just clarity, the kind that settles in after you've rehearsed the same betrayal in your head 100 times. I showered, I dressed. I made breakfast with slow, deliberate movements. I even watered the succulents I hadn't touched in a week. By the time I logged onto my computer for my 10 a.m. meeting, Randall was already sprawled across the couch, his laptop open but unused. He was flipping channels with one hand and sipping iced coffee from a cup I had specifically labeled for guests. Of course, that label meant nothing now. The meeting started. We were reviewing quarterly data, nothing fancy, just graphs and budget updates. I shared my screen, answered questions, nodded when I needed to. Then something happened. My screen froze. "Are you still with us, Iris?" My manager asked through a stuttering connection. I scrambled to refresh, clicked tabs, tried to rejoin. My browser said I wasn't logged in. I checked the email app, nothing. Then I opened the trash folder, just in case. And there it was. Gone. The entire client thread. 47 messages, proposal drafts, legal documentation. Every part of the discussion I'd led for the past month. I stood up so quickly my chair squeaked against the floor. Randall looked up at me, startled. He pulled off his headset, blinked like he didn't expect to be interrupted. "Did you use my laptop?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He shrugged. "Yeah, I was watching that documentary about that dude who faked being a doctor. Wild story. I probably clicked something. Didn't mean to delete anything." I just stared at him, not blinking, not breathing too heavily, just watching. This wasn't clumsy. This wasn't accidental. This was sabotage with a smile. "You had your own laptop in your lap," I said, voice low. "Yeah, but your screen's bigger," he answered without shame. I nodded once, turned, and went back to my room. I didn't slam the door. That's not how wars like this are won. Later that evening, after making copies of every restored document I could, I pulled out a manila folder from my drawer, one that had accumulated unopened mail over the past month. I didn't usually read every envelope the moment it came. Bills I already paid online, junk mail I ignored. But one envelope caught my eye. It was addressed to Randall Murtaugh. Sender, Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. I opened it. Inside, a confirmation document. He had listed me, full name, address, as his financial supporter and domestic cohabitant. He'd used my employment records, my address, even my estimated income. And somewhere, someone had stamped that as verified. I sat down on the edge of my bed and let the paper fall to my lap. When I confronted him the next day, he was on his phone, sprawled in the recliner like a teenager after school. "You listed me as your financial supporter?" I asked, holding the paper up. He looked up from his screen, squinted, then nodded. "Yeah, it made the process easier. I figured it wouldn't hurt anything. You're stable. They love stable people." That word again. I didn't answer. I just turned, walked back to my room, and opened a new document on my laptop. Evidence of unauthorized digital access. I wrote everything down, every incident, every date, every screenshot I'd taken since he moved in. Then I sent the document to HR, not as a complaint, not even with a request, just with a note. For compliance tracking, no action requested at this time. I didn't want an apology. And I wanted leverage. Over the next few days, I began extracting myself from the apartment like a careful surgeon separating tissue. I packed photo frames, external hard drives, my first aid kit, my spare charger, my tax documents, anything with my name, my fingerprints, my memory. Bit by bit, the version of the apartment that had once reflected me was fading, and I was the one erasing it, intentionally this time. One evening, as I loaded a box into my closet, Randall passed by and chuckled. "You finally Marie Kondoing your life?" he asked. I closed the box and smiled. "No, just prepping for a move," he laughed. "Good for you. Change is good. Might even be good for your mood." I didn't answer. Vera was sitting nearby, pretending not to hear. She was thumbing through a magazine she hadn't actually flipped a page in for 10 minutes. They thought I was being dramatic. I was being strategic. That night, after cleaning the counter and checking the locks, I took the last of the tools I had bought the week before. Screwdrivers, adhesive clips, a small hidden camera. I installed it above the bookshelf, facing the front door and part of the living room, just in case. When I finished, I stood back and looked around the room. I hadn't smiled in weeks, but now I did. Not because anything had changed, but because I had, Let's see who signs for packages now. And they signed something they didn't even read. It was Saturday afternoon, a few days after the camera went up, and Vera insisted we show our faces at her cousin Lynette's backyard barbecue. I hadn't been to a family event in over a year, not out of spite, but necessity. Somehow, family gatherings always turned into a spotlight competition where I was the set crew behind the curtain, and everyone else took center stage for things they didn't earn. I drove us there. Randall rode shotgun, wearing a button-down shirt he'd borrowed from my closet without asking. I didn't comment. Vera sat in the back, applying her lipstick in the mirror like she was about to host a fundraiser. By the time we arrived, Lynette's yard was full. Folding chairs surrounded 2 picnic tables covered in potato salad, baked beans, store-bought cupcakes with melting frosting. A speaker played a playlist full of 90s R&B. Kids screamed somewhere near the swing set. Randall was already halfway across the yard before I'd finished locking the car. "He's been such a blessing," Vera said, waving toward him like she'd just sent an angel into the party. "Keeping me grounded, helping with everything since I left the house." I blinked. My mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. The woman who paid for the drinks was invisible. The man drinking them was the hero. We walked over to the food table. Vera accepted hugs and greetings, smiled like she was auditioning for sainthood. No one really looked at me. Lynette handed me a plate and said, "You look tired." It wasn't a question. It was a sentence you throw at women when you don't want to acknowledge their boundaries. "I'm good," I replied, taking the plate but not filling it. After a while, someone raised a glass of lemonade and tapped a fork against it. "Let's take a second to honor the people who keep our family going." Heads turned, eyes sparkled. I stood near the back, barely holding my paper plate. "To Vera," someone said. Applause. "And to Randall," another voice chimed in. "Man's been solid for her since she moved out, held her down, gave her stability." I stared. I clenched my jaw so tight I could feel the muscles twitch. There it was, my life rewritten without me, in front of a crowd. Toasted with off-brand soda and shallow smiles. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I lifted my phone. I had planned to use the camera for security, for documentation, but now it had a new job. I tapped record and filmed Vera's face as she laughed beside Randall, captured her nodding like the words were true, as if the sacrifices I made were hers, as if the roof over her head had materialized from prayer and not the 40-hour weeks I clocked to afford that mortgage. The next morning, after breakfast, I passed by the kitchen table and noticed Vera's iPad sitting open, half charged. She'd been using it to order vitamins and read her tabloid articles. She never set a passcode, said it was too much trouble to remember. I picked it up, swiped open. Her inbox was cluttered, as usual, ads, spam, a few bills, but one folder stood out, Dana. I clicked. There were messages from Randall. Not to her, to someone named Dana, and it didn't take long to understand. "Once I get the claim finalized, I'll have the funds, then I'm done playing house." No, she doesn't suspect a thing. The old lady thinks I'm her second chance. She's gullible, stable, but gullible. You know how these women get when they hit their 60s, scared of being alone. There were more, photos, promises. A screenshot of Vera's insurance info attached to a plan application under Randall's name. I didn't feel shock, just confirmation. He was using her, and worse, she handed him the tools. I copied every message, took screenshots, saved PDFs, transferred them to a secure folder on my drive. Later that day, I went to my room and opened the drawer where I kept my father's necklace. I hadn't worn it in years. It was simple. Thin gold chain, small pendant engraved with 3 letters that meant nothing to anyone but him and me. "Trust is earned," he once told me in high school, "and even blood lies." I slipped the necklace over my head. That evening, I printed the messages and slipped them into an envelope labeled "Confidential, for Vera only." I didn't add a note. Didn't write, "Love Iris." I just placed it on her nightstand like you'd leave a bill, because that's what it was. A receipt. She read it the next morning. I knew she had because by 8 a.m., Randall was pacing the hallway like a caged animal. Something had cracked. I was packing my shoes when he knocked on my door. I opened it slowly, meeting his eyes with the kind of quiet that unnerves men who rely on your silence to stay comfortable. "What's going on with you lately?" he asked. I raised one eyebrow. "You'll find out soon. Hopefully, Dana will explain it better." His face twisted. Vera screamed about an hour later. A thud first, then her voice shrill, confused, betrayed. She yelled his name 3 times. I was in my room, taping up a box of kitchen utensils. I didn't go check. I didn't ask if she was okay. I didn't rush to mediate or soothe or explain. Instead, I pressed the tape down, labeled the box Essentials, and whispered to no one in particular. One more night. There was a silence to the morning I hadn't felt in months. Not the kind that came from exhaustion or resentment, but the kind that felt earned. Like the calm after boarding a flight that's taken too long to taxi. I sat on the edge of my bed, shoes laced, sweatshirt zipped. I glanced around one last time at the walls that used to feel like mine and now just felt like surfaces. The moving truck arrived at 6:20 a.m. On the dot. I'd parked it myself the night before in the alley behind the building, backed in clean and quiet. No one had noticed. By 6:30, the dolly was loaded with the first boxes. I worked alone. I'd paid for movers, but I wanted to be the one to carry it all out, at least the important stuff. The rest could be handled by professionals. It was a principle thing. You don't need permission to leave what was never yours. The couch I bought from a second-hand shop when I first moved in. It went first, then the mattress, the rug, the TV, the router, the coffee table, every lamp, every dish, even the light bulbs. I unscrewed them methodically, each twist another stitch removed from a wound that had overstayed its healing window. At 7:12, Randall emerged from the hallway in gym shorts and a t-shirt that wasn't his. He rubbed his eyes, blinked at the empty space where the couch had been. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked. I didn't turn around right away. I placed the last of my silverware into a padded crate, closed the lid, and finally faced him. Reclaiming. He laughed, or tried to. "Is this a joke?" I handed him an envelope. Inside was a copy of the real estate transfer, a notarized letter, a date-stamped final notice. "The condo's sold. You've got 2 days to vacate." He blinked, jaw open. "You can't be serious." Vera came into the room then, hair tied back, house slippers on. She looked between us, eyes narrowing. "What is this?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I simply picked up the envelope again, handed it to her, and watched her read. Her hand shook by the second page. "No, you didn't," she whispered. "You didn't sell it." I looked her dead in the eye. "I did. 3 weeks ago. The papers were signed. You just didn't notice because you were too busy defending a lie." They stood there, speechless. The space between us colder than the tile beneath my feet. The doorbell rang at 9 o'clock. A process server in a windbreaker held out a manila envelope. "Randall Murtaugh?" He took it, frowning. "You've been served," the man said, turned, and walked away. I didn't ask what was inside. I already knew. I'd seen the copies. Dana was suing him. Fraud, identity theft, misuse of personal data. The cherry on top. Vera's signature was listed as co-signer on 2 of the documents he submitted. Whether she knew it or not, her name was on the line. He used her signature the same way he used my house, freely and foolishly. Later that morning, I walked back into my bedroom and stood by the dresser. There was one final box sitting beside it, taped neatly, labeled Day 1. It was the first box I'd ever packed when I moved into this place. Back when I was fresh out of college, riding high off my first real job offer, scared out of my mind but optimistic. It held my first journal, a framed certificate from grad school, the receipt from the dinner I bought myself to celebrate being on my own. Back then, I packed it with shaky hands. Today, I carried it out steady. At 11:47, Vera came to my room. She didn't knock, just stood in the doorway like she hadn't spent the past few months slowly dismantling everything I had built. "You didn't have to do this," she said. Her voice was tight, trying to hold emotion without letting it spill. We're family. I zipped my duffel bag. You didn't lose a daughter, I said, calm. You gave her away. He just picked her up. She didn't respond, just stood there, blinking, and I saw the weight finally land on her. But I didn't soften, not because I was cruel, because softness had been exploited enough. I walked past her and placed the last bag by the door. I gave one last look at the walls, now stripped bare, the floors dusty where furniture once stood. And then I left. As I drove out of the city, the skyline shrank in my rearview mirror like a memory I'd finally released. Buildings became silhouettes, traffic thinned, the air began to change. I didn't just move out, I moved on. By the time I crossed into Montana, the sky had shifted from pale blue to the kind of gold you only see in postcards. I pulled over on a gravel shoulder, stepped out, and stretched. There was nothing particularly poetic about the moment. No swelling music, no tears, just peace. Back at the apartment, on the kitchen table I once scrubbed every Sunday morning, sat a single sheet of paper, handwritten, unfolded. This was never your home. It was mine, until you treated me like a guest. No signature, no return address, just my words. But healing isn't always quiet. The first morning in Bozeman came without an alarm. No shouting from the living room. No microwave slamming at 2 a.m. No footsteps I didn't recognize, just light, soft and natural, pouring in through thin cotton curtains and landing on the hardwood floor of my tiny apartment above the coffee shop. For the first time in months, I heard only one set of footsteps, mine. I got out of bed slowly, my joints creaking like old floorboards. There was no rush, no one asking for anything, no guilt clinging to the air like humidity. I padded barefoot to the window and pulled the latch open. The mountain air met me halfway, cool, crisp, slightly sweet. Below, a cyclist zipped by. A teenager loaded pastries into the cafe display through the back door. The hum of real life, nothing dramatic, just life. No shouting, no footsteps but mine. Later that morning, I finally unwrapped the photo. It had arrived in the mail from a small restoration service I'd hired 2 months earlier. I'd almost forgotten about it during the chaos, but it came, quietly and whole, just like I'd hoped. The photo showed me, about age 9, sitting on my dad's shoulders in the park near our old duplex in Arvada. He was mid-laugh. My cheeks were red. I was wearing a windbreaker that looked like it belonged in a thrift store window. I hadn't seen his face like that in years, not in memory, not even in my dreams. I chose a wooden frame from the local co-op, nothing ornate, just warm cherry wood, smooth to the touch. I hung it above the corner chair in my new reading nook, right beside the window where light hit just right mid-morning. I didn't cry when I stood back to look at it. I smiled. Peace isn't forgetting, it's choosing what to remember. A few days later, while folding linens in my small living space, my mind drifted back to Denver. I saw myself again, walking out of that apartment with the last of my boxes, Vera crying in the doorway. Randall nowhere in sight. That morning felt both distant and sharp. I remembered the last thing I said to her. You asked me to support him. I chose to support myself. Then I walked, not out of hate, not even anger, just necessity. I haven't heard from her since. And that silence? It's not painful anymore. It's permission. In the afternoons now, I plant flowers outside the cafe. The owner lets me manage the small bed near the sidewalk. I've got lavender, snapdragons, even a few tomatoes in the back corner. It's nothing fancy, just soil, sunlight, water, but it grows. I talk to customers too. Nothing deep. Weather, book recommendations, the best cookie of the week. They smile. I smile back. And it feels real. Not like the kind of smiling I used to do back in that apartment, tight, teeth clenched, waiting for the next apology that never came. I even bought a new pillow last week, just one. Not because someone might need to crash, not because I was hosting, because it was mine. This isn't a new life. It's just the first one I chose for myself. A few weeks after I'd settled in, I got an email from my cousin Ellie. She's the only one who never took sides, who always spoke in facts. She forwarded a local news article about Randall, insurance fraud, multiple counts, fines, civil suit, court hearing. Thought you'd want to see, Ellie wrote. Your name didn't come up. She didn't mention Vera. I later learned she'd moved out of state. Sold what was left of the furniture. The condo was foreclosed. Randall's name is nowhere on anything now, except court records. No bitterness, just facts. One evening, I sat down with my laptop and reread the letter I'd written but never sent, the draft I left folded in the top drawer of my old desk. It wasn't long. I didn't leave because I was weak. I left because I stopped hoping you'd change. Some letters aren't for them. They're for us, for the parts of us that need to hear we were right to leave. That choosing ourselves wasn't betrayal, it was survival. I folded the letter again, placed it in a box marked unsent, not because I was holding on to it, but because it reminded me of a time I let go. The next morning, I opened the coffee shop alone. I flipped the sign to open and brewed the first pot of the day. A breeze came in through the open front door and lifted the corner of the curtain. It was quiet, but not empty. I sat at the counter, cradled my cup, and looked out the window at the mountains that no longer felt foreign. I lost a home, but found a life. And that, maybe, was everything. Sometimes, choosing yourself means walking away from the people who expected you to stay silent forever. This wasn't just a story about betrayal. It was about reclaiming identity, boundaries, and peace in a place where they were never respected. What about you? Have you ever had to walk away from someone who called it family, but treated you like a backup plan? If this story struck a nerve, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories about quiet strength, healing, and the kind of justice that doesn't always make headlines, but sure makes an impact. Hello, my name is Vera. My sister used to mock me for not having a job. At every dinner, every chance she got. What no one knew was, I had quietly built the company she worked for. And when I found out she used my own ideas to climb the ladder, I didn't yell. I fired her. But that's not even the worst part. The real betrayal? It started long before that, with a forged deed, a stolen identity, and a lie so deep it nearly erased me. Why did my own family try to shut me out of everything I built? They say brunch is the new Sunday church. At least, that's how Delaney treats it. Every weekend, like clockwork, she books the most polished table at the Mulberry Inn. White linen napkins, lemon-infused water, waiters who know her name. And I go along, every time, like a ghost dragging herself into someone else's celebration. That morning, I sat quietly at the far end of the table, nursing a lukewarm cappuccino I hadn't asked for. Delaney and her corporate crowd, sharp suits and sharper tongues, were already deep into stories about their latest wins. Client deals, weekend escapes, six-figure bonuses. I smiled when appropriate, nodded when expected, and stayed invisible. It was Kyle, her favorite lapdog, who finally turned to me. So, Vera, what are you working on these days? I opened my mouth, only to be cut off by Delaney's voice, coated in syrup and acid. She's doing what she does best, waiting. A second of silence, then laughter. Loud, knowing, gut-punching laughter. My stomach clenched, but I didn't flinch, not on the outside. I looked down, stirred my cappuccino like it mattered. I could feel their eyes bounce off me like I was a decorative plant someone forgot to water. She's just being modest, Kyle added with a smug grin. Vera's a free spirit, right? I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and forced a smile. I'm building something, on my own, I said, more to myself than anyone else. Ah, so no steady income, another voice chimed in. Maybe Heather, maybe someone else. It didn't matter, they all sounded the same. Delaney took a sip of her mimosa like she'd just dropped the mic, and no one corrected her. I waited for someone, anyone, to say something. My mother-in-law sat 2 seats down. She reached for the fruit tray, changed the topic to local property taxes, and pretended I didn't exist. I excused myself after 15 more minutes of playing along. I told them I had a headache. The truth? My dignity was cracking, and I needed to leave before it shattered completely. The parking lot outside felt like a different world. Quiet, gray, indifferent. I got in my car and just sat there for a moment. The hum of the engine matched the buzzing in my ears. The brunch was supposed to last another hour, maybe more. No one texted to check on me. Driving home, I didn't even turn on the radio. My thoughts were loud enough. I used to have dreams, real ones, big ones, a company plan, designs, goals scribbled in notebooks. But dreams die quietly when no one believes in them. Not even you. At a red light, I pulled out my phone, opened a resume draft I had been editing for weeks. Every time I looked at it, it felt like I was begging. For a shot. For validation. For someone to care. I hit delete. The green light flashed. I kept driving. Back home, the house greeted me in silence. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to see the space to feel how empty it was. Instead, I sat at the kitchen counter and scrolled through the brunch group chat. A photo popped up, everyone smiling in front of the bar's flower wall. I wasn't in it. No one had asked me to join. And then, just as I was about to close the app, another message appeared, from Delaney. You know, I carried this family on my back. Some of us have real responsibilities. It wasn't meant just for me, but it hit like a direct shot. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I put my phone down, folded my hands together, and breathed. She'd said what she really thought. And now I had to decide. Would I stay the silent, steady one forever? I didn't reply to her message. I didn't even touch my phone for the rest of the evening. Instead, I poured myself a glass of tap water, turned off the hallway light, and sat in the quiet of my living room. The stillness had a way of pressing on me, like gravity pulling on everything I hadn't said out loud. She carried the family? I carried silence. That had to count for something. The next day, around 5:30, Mom texted me. Dinner tonight, just the family. Come if you're free. Just the family. That phrase landed oddly. But I went. I always did. And just like always, I arrived 5 minutes early and ended up being the last one seated. Mom's house looked exactly the same as it did when I was 15. Plastic-covered cushions, family portraits from decades ago still hung slightly crooked in the hallway, and the same faint scent of lemon pledge and old paper. Comforting. Familiar. And yet, that night, the air inside felt tight. Delaney had already taken the center seat, naturally. The chair with the best lighting, the closest to the kitchen. She wore a navy blue blazer that probably cost more than my rent, and had the kind of posture you only learn after years of winning arguments you shouldn't have won. I ended up at the far end of the table, between a crooked lampshade and a dusty sideboard. Dinner was a spread of roast chicken, garlic green beans, and mashed potatoes. I spooned a little of everything onto my plate, but didn't eat. Just moved the food around, tried to look engaged. Halfway through the meal, Delaney clinked her fork against her glass. Can I say something? I didn't look up. I already knew it wouldn't be good. I just want to say, she began, standing for emphasis, that I'm proud of how far we've come. Some of us have made sacrifices others don't even see. She gestured around the table like she was giving a TED Talk. I paid off Mom's surgery bills. I kept this house from foreclosure, and I made sure everyone had what they needed, no matter what it cost me. Mom gave a faint nod and patted Delaney's hand. I stared at the gravy bleeding into my potatoes. No one said anything, not my uncle, not my cousin Matthew, who was already 3 beers in, not even Mom. It was as if they were all watching a performance and didn't want to interrupt the show. Delaney sat back down, adjusted her napkin, and smiled, like she had just accepted an award. I didn't speak. There was no space for my voice at that table, and I wasn't going to fight for scraps anymore. After dinner, I drove home under a sky smeared with clouds. The air was heavy with the scent of early spring, wet grass, pavement just beginning to cool from the day's warmth. Once inside, I kicked off my shoes, tossed my keys on the counter, and collapsed on the couch. The silence wasn't peaceful this time. It buzzed. Out of habit, I opened the family group chat, scrolled past memes, grocery deals, and blurry photos of someone's new puppy. Then a video started playing, auto-played without sound at first. The thumbnail froze on Delaney's face. She was holding a champagne flute, cheeks flushed, clearly mid-toast. I tapped to unmute. Vera! She laughed, eyes squinting. You mean our family's pity case? Every family's got one. A burst of laughter followed. People I didn't recognize, co-workers maybe, colleagues who only knew me through her twisted lens. One woman asked, "Wait, she's your sister?" Delaney rolled her eyes, then sipped her drink. Only technically. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I let the video play twice, then a third time. Each viewing hit differently. Anger, shame, then something else, something steelier. I downloaded the video, then deleted it from the chat. It wasn't about proving her wrong, not yet. It was about not letting her control the story anymore. Later that night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush still in hand, not moving. She thinks I'm disposable, I whispered. My reflection didn't argue. I thought back to college, when professors praised my projects, when I stayed up designing mock-ups, when I once pitched a startup idea that got attention from a local tech incubator. I used to believe I mattered. I opened my bedside drawer and pulled out a worn, spiral-bound notebook. "Let them underestimate you," was scribbled across the cover. Inside, on the next clean page, I wrote 2 names. People from the video. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but they mattered now. I flipped back to the cover and pressed the notebook shut. Then I went back to the group chat, curious. The video had dozens of reactions, hearts, laughing faces, a few inside jokes, but one comment stood out. "She still thinks she owns something. Cute." I stared at it, and without smiling, I whispered, "We'll see." The next morning, I stood at the kitchen counter, slowly slicing a pear. Not for breakfast, just something to do with my hands. The notebook lay nearby, closed but humming with new purpose. I could still hear that video in my head, each laugh like a nail being tapped in deeper. I had no plan. Not yet. But I wasn't waiting around to be pitied anymore. By late afternoon, I'd convinced myself it was just a regular errand run. I packed a tote with some soup, Tylenol, a box of herbal tea, and a sleeve of shortbread cookies, my mom's favorite. It wasn't out of the ordinary. She hadn't been feeling great lately, and I used to drop things off when I could. Only this time, I needed something too. A conversation. The drive across town was quiet, the sky turning silver, threatening rain, but never delivering. Her house sat tucked behind a line of maple trees, the same ones Delaney and I used to rake leaves under every fall. I parked at the curb and walked up the cracked path, balancing the grocery bag on one hip. She opened the door with a surprised smile. "You didn't text." "I figured I'd stop by, just for a bit." She stepped aside, and I followed the scent of lavender cleaner into the kitchen. Everything was in its place. Everything always was. I set the bag down on the counter. "This is for you. Some things you like. I thought you might be out of tea." She smiled, almost tender. "Thank you, sweetheart." We sat at the table. She poured us both a glass of water. We didn't speak much, but eventually I cleared my throat and said, "I wanted to talk to you about dinner the other night." Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders tightened. I went on. "What Delaney said, it hurt, a lot." And no one said anything. She kept her eyes on the rim of her glass. "She didn't mean it that way." I gave a short breath through my nose. "She said she carried the family, that she saved everyone, like I've never done a thing in my life that mattered." "You're the baby," she said, like that explained it all. "You've always had less weight to carry. That's not her fault." I blinked. "So, she gets to mock me, and I'm supposed to thank her for it?" Mom didn't look at me when she replied. "Sometimes the youngest needs to learn when to be quiet." The words settled like concrete inside my chest. Not shouted, not cruel, just carved from years of quiet bias, the kind that molds everything you believe about yourself. I nodded slowly and stood. "Okay." "I didn't mean it like," she started, but I was already picking up my tote. It's fine, I said gently. I should go. The ride back home felt longer, though I took the same route. No music this time. I couldn't bear even a single note. Once home, I sat at my desk and opened the bottom drawer. I hadn't touched it in years. It smelled like dust and something faintly acidic, old glue or dried-out pens. I reached in and pulled out a plastic baggie. Inside, a pale blue ribbon folded unevenly. Science fair. 9th grade. I remembered everything. Staying after school, building the model volcano by myself. Delaney had promised she'd show up. She never did. Mom called that night to say work ran late. I stood outside the gym with that ribbon in my hand, the crowd thinning. No one came. One of the judges had said, "You've got something. You're the one with the spark." But no one at home ever heard those words. Now the ribbon looked faded, its edges frayed. I could have thrown it out. But instead, I slipped it into a folder marked Proof of Me. Inside were old report cards, a few letters of recommendation, and a photo of me giving a talk during senior year of college. I closed the folder and held it for a while. Later that evening, after I changed into sweats and made a cup of ginger tea, I pulled my old laptop out from the hall closet. It still worked, miraculously. I plugged in an old USB backup and waited. Click by click, images unfolded. My senior thesis portfolio, branding projects, user flow mock-ups I'd once been so proud of. Somewhere inside this mess was the version of me I had put on hold. For family, for peace, for nothing. I opened a new tab and searched for local accelerator programs. Found one with an open application window. The form was straightforward. They didn't ask for pedigree or referrals, just vision. I filled in the basics, then paused. It asked for a business name. I didn't have one. Yet. So I saved the draft and closed the laptop. It wasn't about winning a grant or proving a point. Not really. It was about giving myself permission to remember who I was before I started believing them. The house was quiet, lights low. I leaned back on the couch, knees pulled up, arms around them. I'd spent most of my life waiting to be seen, to be picked, to be loved the way I loved. But that night, I finally stopped waiting for them to see me. I started learning how to see myself again. The next morning, I made a list. Groceries, laundry, sort through old receipts, check mortgage renewal notice. I didn't think twice when I clicked the email from the mortgage company. It was just a standard reminder. But something about the wording felt off. It mentioned an ownership update and gave me a link to view the most recent title information. I clicked. The page loaded slowly, like it knew what it was about to do to me. And then, there it was. Delaney Monroe, under legal title holder. I blinked, hit refresh, scanned the document again. Delaney's name, not mine. I stared at the screen for several minutes, barely breathing. My stomach clenched in that slow, spreading way that usually comes just before bad news. But this wasn't new. This was something old, something that had been sitting there quietly for years, like mold under wallpaper. I remembered the down payment. That check I wrote with my own hand, from the inheritance Aunt Julia left me. I remembered going to the notary. I remembered Delaney tagging along because she had more experience with paperwork. I remembered signing something, but I was rushing, trusting. She said it was just for convenience, just to help with the bank process. Now her name was on the deed. I grabbed my phone and dialed my mother. She answered on the third ring, breathless. "Oh, honey, everything okay?" "Mom, do you remember when I bought the house? Why is Delaney listed as the owner?" There was a pause. Then, that familiar rustling sound of her settling into her chair. "Oh, well, she handled all the forms, right? She said she'd keep things organized for you. You didn't want to deal with all the back and forth." I swallowed hard. "You knew?" "I just assumed you both agreed to it. Delaney's always been so responsible." I didn't say anything. What was there to say? "She's looked out for you, Vera. I hope you remember that. Looked out for me. like a wolf looks out for sheep. I ended the call politely, then sat still for a long while. The hum of the refrigerator, the only noise in the kitchen. Later that week, I got a message from an old colleague, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. He said there was a local recognition ceremony happening, one of those tech community events where startups and companies gave lightning talks and awards were handed out. "Thought you might want to attend," he said. "Your sister's on the program." I hesitated. Then RSVP'd yes. The event took place in a renovated warehouse with exposed brick walls and cold brew stations at every corner. I arrived early, took a seat in the back, stayed silent. When Delaney stepped onto the stage, the audience applauded like she was royalty. She wore that sharp navy suit I helped her pick out during a sale at Nordstrom Rack 3 years ago. She smiled, adjusted the mic, and began. "We built this with vision, persistence, and resilience. Our latest accessibility suite comes from a commitment to empowering every user, regardless of ability." My hands went cold. That phrase, accessibility suite, was mine. It was something I had mapped out on the back of a napkin one summer, during a long rant about how apps ignore seniors with tremors and aging eyes. I'd drawn icons, talked through tap sensitivity. I told her about it in her own kitchen, over coffee. She nodded, listened, even said it was smart thinking. And now it was her award-winning idea. She never mentioned me. The applause thundered again as she took a bow. I stood and left before she could spot me, walked briskly to my car, each footstep harder than the last. Once inside, I didn't cry. I just stared through the windshield as the rain finally arrived and tapped the glass in soft waves. That night, I opened a fresh Google Doc and started writing. Not a journal entry, not a letter, a list, with timestamps, names, screenshots, email threads. Then I opened a new tab and typed, "Property title dispute, legal help, Charlotte, NC." I found her name instantly, Ruthie Baxter. We were college friends. She'd always had a thing for justice, even when it cost her. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but I found her law firm listed with a specialty in property and IP. I sent an email, straightforward. No small talk. She replied within the hour. "Vera, hell yes, I'll help you. Let's talk tomorrow." And we did. We met the next afternoon at a small cafe just off Tryon Street. She wore a trench coat and carried a binder the size of a small toddler. "Okay," she said, flipping it open. "I pulled the public record already. Your name isn't anywhere on it. But if we can prove misrepresentation or signature coercion, there's a shot. You signed anything under false pretenses?" Yes, I trusted her. "That's not legally binding," Ruthie said with a bitter smile. "But it's a good start." We spent the next hour going over everything I remembered. She asked for any documents I might have kept, any old scans or backups. At one point, she looked up and said, "If Delaney really forged this, we'll make sure she regrets ever touching your name." I nodded. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't notice. It was the first time in a long while I didn't feel alone. Ruthie and I parted ways just before noon. I remember sitting in my car afterward, engine running but unmoving, hands still on the wheel. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was playing defense. Something in me had shifted, and I wasn't sure if it was relief or fuel, but I was ready to do something with it. I drove downtown, not for errands, not for a meeting, just for a cup of coffee at the place Delaney and I used to go before things changed. Maybe part of me wanted to reclaim it, or maybe I was chasing something familiar in a sea of things I no longer recognized. The place hadn't changed much. Same burnt orange cushions, same chalkboard menu that never really got updated. I took my drink to the corner table near the window, the one we used to fight over. Halfway through my latte, I heard two women at the next table talking animatedly. "Did you get your invite yet?" one asked. "For the charity tech thing next Thursday?" The other laughed. "Girl, I've been pre-registered since March. Delaney Monroe sent mine herself." I didn't move, didn't blink. Delaney. Charity tech event. Next Thursday. That was my event. I'd co-founded that series 3 years ago. I'd built the deck, pitched the first sponsors, even helped write the bylaws when we moved it under the holding company. My name was on the first 5 programs. And now? Now I was learning about it from strangers in a coffee shop. I pulled out my phone, searched for the event website. There it was. Polished, full color, stacked with names I recognized. And not mine. Not even as a guest. I called the venue directly, giving a fake name at first, just to get through. Then I switched to my real one. Hi, this is Vera Monroe. I'm trying to confirm my registration status for the Impact Forward Tech Forum next Thursday. There was a pause. Some clicking. I see the list here, the young man said. You're not listed as an attendee. Maybe check with your company's coordinator? My company is hosting the event. Another silence. He lowered his voice. I was told to list only active stakeholders. That came from upper admin. I thanked him, hung up, and stared at the logo on the website, one I had designed during a sleepless night 2 years ago. It wasn't a mistake. They'd erased me on purpose. That night, I opened a new document on my laptop. Exclusion logs. I added the call, the event, the name of the venue contact. I knew it wouldn't matter in court, but it mattered to me. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I applied for a job at my own company. With Ruthie's help, I created a profile under my middle name, Veronica Gray, a fresh Gmail account, an anonymized phone number, and a carefully edited resume. Same qualifications, same years of experience, but none of the baggage of being the founder who walked away. The position? UX strategist, mid-level, nothing fancy. I submitted the application on a Thursday. By Sunday morning, the rejection came through. We appreciate your interest in this position. After review, we believe your experience may not align with our current team dynamic. Thank you for considering us. I opened the PDF rejection note. It was signed by the department head, someone Delaney had gone on a girls' trip with to Cabo last fall. I printed it and filed it under bias employment. I didn't feel rage, not even heartbreak, just confirmation. The rot wasn't just Delaney, it was in the air they all breathed. She'd built an entire ecosystem where I didn't belong, not even anonymously. I opened a blank email draft. 2. Delaney Monroe, subject, Forum registration. Delaney, I noticed I wasn't included on the forum guest list. I'm sure it was an oversight, but wanted to confirm before the event. Thanks, Vera, I hit send. The response came 12 minutes later. Hi, Vera. We're focusing this year's invitations on current contributors. That said, you're welcome to attend as a guest of the HR department if needed. Best, Delaney. I reread that line 3 times. Guest of the HR department. I highlighted it in red and took a screenshot. Then I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and smiled. Not with joy, but with clarity. Good. That's on record now. They'd forgotten the difference between silence and absence. I wasn't gone. I was gathering. I closed my laptop, made myself a cup of tea, and scribbled another note into my legal pad. Next time they see me, I won't need a ticket. Because I wasn't just documenting anymore. I was baiting them. And they were walking right in. The sun hadn't risen yet when Ruthie called. Her voice buzzed with urgency. Not panic, but that quiet hum of adrenaline people get when they've just seen something they can't ignore. I have it, she said. An hour later, we met in the dim back corner of a diner on the edge of Matthews. She slid a manila folder across the table like we were trading secrets in a Cold War movie. Inside were photocopies of share transfer documents that bore my name, my old signature, and a notary stamp dated 6 years ago. But here's the thing, I never signed those forms. That isn't my signature, I whispered, flipping the pages. It's close, Ruthie replied. But look, see the loop in the M? That's your style now. But this matches the one from your first apartment lease. She duplicated your early signature. I stared at the curve of ink on the page, trying to remember when I'd last used that version of my name. College, maybe. Maybe earlier. She must have scanned an old co-signed doc, Ruthie added. A joint agreement, probably. She layered it over new language. She played the long game, I said. The words fell out of my mouth flat, but they hit like bricks inside my chest. Ruthie looked at me squarely. We can argue forgery, we can argue coercion, and I've already started drafting a statement of claim. But Vera, you need to be ready. This is war. I nodded once. I didn't flinch. I didn't fidget. I just took a sip of my coffee and felt the bitterness settle into my bones. That bitter was mine now. It would keep me upright. Later that evening, I got home and found something new waiting for me. A manila envelope was taped to my door. I knew before I opened it. I knew by the weight of the paper, by the sharp corners, by the familiar tightness in my jaw. The universe didn't even try to be clever anymore. Inside, a formal notice to vacate. 30 days, signed by the legal property owner, Delaney. The stated reason? Failure to contribute meaningfully to household expenses. I laughed. Not a full laugh. More like air punching through clenched teeth. For 10 years I'd paid that mortgage. Every month. No missed payments. My name wasn't on the deed, but my hands had scrubbed every baseboard, patched every leak. I'd painted that bathroom lavender myself the year after Dad died. Now I was being tossed out like clutter from a garage. I walked through each room, lights off, touched the edge of the windowsill I'd sanded down myself, sat on the floor of the kitchen where I'd once spilled wine, and cried for hours after my first failed product launch. I touched each place I'd poured love into, not just time. Then I stood in the middle of the living room, hands on hips, and whispered to no one, "You think this will break me?" I packed a single duffel bag, one change of clothes, my laptop, the notebook that had grown heavier by the week, and the printout of the eviction notice. The rest? I didn't need it. Let it rot or burn. I'd done a full reset before. I knew how to start with nothing. As the clock struck midnight, I drove to Ruthie's apartment and handed her the folder. She read it again, lips pursed. "We move now," I said. She nodded. "I'll send it to Bryce, IP and real estate litigator. He's discreet." We stayed up till 3 filing affidavits, notarizing statements, backing up timestamps and call logs. I opened a new LLC account under a fresh name, one Delaney wouldn't recognize. I made sure it couldn't be traced. Then I sent 3 emails. First, to the board chair of my original company. Second, to the HR compliance officer. Third, to the brand's public email account for internal submissions. Each message said the same thing, with minor variations. In light of recent documentation and legal findings, I am formally requesting an internal audit and ownership review of all founder equity and stakeholder arrangements. I didn't sign it "warm regards," just Vera Monroe. Short, legal, direct. The final act of the night was uploading everything into a locked Google Drive folder titled, "In Case They Try Again." And they would. But this time, I'd meet them at the door. This time, I wasn't whispering. I was recording. I barely slept the night before. Not from nerves, but from purpose. There's a strange kind of energy that takes over when you finally decide you're done being polite about your own erasure. At 6:15 a.m., I zipped my overnight bag, adjusted the collar of my navy blazer, and slipped on the same pair of low black heels I wore the day I pitched my first startup. My hair was tied back, not stiff, not dramatic, just clean, intentional. Like everything else that morning, the drive to the office was quiet. No music, no podcasts, just the sound of early traffic and the steady rhythm of my own breath. When I pulled into the underground lot, I saw unfamiliar cars in the reserved spots, new names on the brass placards by the elevators, but mine still hung there, faint but etched. Reserved, V. Monroe. No one had scraped it off. I stepped out, walked through the private lobby entrance, and scanned my temporary badge. The security guard glanced up, startled, but said nothing. I didn't give him a reason to. Upstairs, the glass doors to the executive floor were already propped open. The receptionist, early 20s, headset slightly crooked, looked up from her screen. "Are you Ms. Chin?" she asked, eyes scanning her log. "No," I replied with a calm smile, "but you'll want to mark me down as present." I didn't wait for her response. My heels echoed across the marble tile as I walked down the corridor, past framed photos of product launches I'd spearheaded but had long since been cropped out of. At the end of the hall was the conference room. Inside, the board was gathering. 12 men and women in tailored suits, seated at a long walnut table. Bottled water, tablets, neatly folded meeting agendas. And at the front, standing confidently with a laser pointer in hand, was Delaney. She was mid-sentence, describing the foundational design evolution of our flagship product, when she looked up and saw me in the doorway. Her mouth froze mid-word. The color drained slightly from her cheeks. She didn't stop talking, just stammered, then switched the slide quickly. The next image flashed onto the screen, a timeline of the company's brand identity over the years. In the center, larger than the rest, was a graphic I had designed on my second-hand laptop in a cramped studio apartment over a decade ago. She didn't credit me. She didn't have to. I recognized the color code I created, the angled font I'd spent nights refining, the tagline I once scribbled on a sticky note during a coffee-fueled brainstorm. "Access isn't an option, it's a promise." I stepped inside, uninvited, and walked toward the head of the table. Not rushing, not asking. Delaney's voice faltered. No one else spoke. I set my leather folder on the table, opened it, and placed my credentials beside it. My newly reinstated badge from Reynolds Holdings. CEO, Vera Monroe. Then I turned to the board. "I believe you're discussing my work. Please don't let me interrupt." For a few seconds, no one moved. Then Delaney cleared her throat and tried to resume, flipping to the next slide. Another of my designs. Another quote pulled from my private notes. "Resilience isn't built, it's remembered," she read aloud, as if the words had always belonged to her. I didn't speak. I opened my laptop instead. One click, and the projection screen behind her changed. On it, a series of folders, each named, time-stamped, documented. "Initial draft files," I said calmly. "Original design metadata, copyright filings, patent abstracts." Then I clicked again, revealing emails from years ago. I had sent her the files during our late-night collaboration sessions. I had trusted her then. She had built her reputation on them since. Delaney's face hardened. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to beg, but I raised a hand. "I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm not here to take back what can't be undone." I closed the laptop and looked around the room. "But I want the record to be corrected, and moving forward, you will cite authorship accurately. You will not erase me." A board member finally spoke. "Ms. Monroe, would you consider returning formally?" I didn't answer right away. I turned to Delaney instead and leaned in close. "I'm not here to ruin you," I said, barely above a whisper. "I'm here to remind you whose name you erased." Then I walked out. I didn't need applause. I didn't need permission. I'd already reclaimed everything that mattered. I left the boardroom and headed for the empty lounge one floor below. The silence there was thicker, uninterrupted by the shuffle of assistants or the soft hum of screensavers. I sat alone with a cup of stale coffee and my folder still warm from the laptop. I didn't sip the coffee. I wasn't thirsty. I was waiting. 10 minutes later, Ruthie joined me. She didn't sit at first, just stood beside the chair, watching me carefully. Then she reached into her bag and slid an email across the table. "Thought you'd want to see this before we go back up," she said. The subject line was sharp. Internal HR brief, Monroe situation. The body? A message Delaney had written nearly a year ago. "Vera hasn't contributed in any meaningful way in years. She's been living off old equity and emotional guilt. Frankly, she's our family's freeloader." There was more, but I stopped reading. My chest didn't tighten the way it used to. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I reached into my folder and pulled out the bank wire confirmation. $62,500. 3 years ago. To cover a sudden liquidity crisis Delaney had during her ill-fated boutique expansion. She'd said it was temporary. She'd never mentioned it again. I placed the receipt next to the email and looked up at Ruthie. "Are you going to tell them?" she asked. I folded the email neatly and tucked it behind the receipt. "No," I said. "I'm going to show them." The final board session started at 1. This time, I didn't wait in the hallway. I entered first, stood by the projection screen, and opened my folder without saying a word. The board members arrived one by one. Some nodded. Others kept their heads down. Delaney was the last to walk in. She looked calm, but her eyes scanned the room like a woman checking exits. She took her seat across from me and crossed her legs, too casually. "I'll make this brief," I began, my voice steady. "There have been questions about authorship, about responsibility, about truth." I clicked the first slide. A scan of the forged signature on the equity transfer form. Then, a comparison with my real signature from verified documents. Ruthie stood nearby, confirming each entry. Then I moved to the next slide. Photos of brand material time-stamped years before Delaney ever stepped foot in a pitch meeting. After that came the emails, forwarded copies of messages she'd edited and resent under her name. But I saved the best for last. I pulled up the email Ruthie had just shown me. Then, without fanfare, I placed the wire receipt on the conference table and pushed it toward the center. "She said I was mooching," I said quietly. "But this was my savings. I didn't ask for credit. I didn't even ask for thanks. I did it because she was drowning, and I didn't want her to drown." Delaney let out a shaky breath. "That's a personal matter," she tried to say, but her voice cracked. "No," I cut in. "It's a pattern. Because this is what you do, Delaney. You turn kindness into currency, and when it no longer serves you, you rewrite the past." I paused, looked around the room. No one met my eyes. "You used my name. You used my work. You told a version of this story where you were the savior and I was the burden." I pulled a set of printed letters from my folder, signed, dated, reviewed by our legal team. "These are the terminations," I said, "effective immediately, for breach of ethical conduct, misrepresentation of IP, and falsifying internal records." I slid the letters across the table to Delaney and her two closest allies, former roommates, now heads of departments that had once blocked my applications. One board member cleared his throat. "Do we need a formal vote?" Another responded, "No, it's clear." Delaney looked up at me, her voice cracking. "You can't just throw me away. We're blood." I nodded slowly. "Exactly. And that's why this hurts more than it should. But I'm done sacrificing myself on the altar of family." She stood up. "You think you're better than me now?" "No," I said. "I always was. You just convinced me not to believe it." Security entered quietly. Delaney's allies stood as well, deflated and speechless. No shouting, no final insults. Just 3 people who had finally run out of lies. As they were escorted from the room, one reporter from the internal comms team snapped a photo. The click of the camera echoed like a gavel. When the room cleared, I stayed behind. The sun streamed in through the tall windows, casting a quiet spotlight on the head of the table. I walked over, ran my fingers across the etched glass nameplate. Vera Monroe, CEO. For the first time, it wasn't taped, wasn't borrowed. It was mine. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. I didn't want applause. I just wanted my name back. The next morning, I arrived at the office long before anyone else. The air was still, almost reverent, as if the walls themselves were catching their breath after the storm that passed. My heels echoed softly as I walked through the polished lobby. My reflection caught in the glass, a quieter version of the woman who stood here years ago. She was younger, hungrier, but she had no idea how much she'd need to lose before she could reclaim herself. When I reached the top floor, the receptionist glanced up and offered a cautious smile. Ms. Monroe, she said, her voice nearly a whisper. I nodded gently, not correcting her tone or cadence. It would take time, and I was in no rush. My office, yes, mine, was exactly as it had been left the evening before, but the sunlight painted it in a warmer shade this time. It poured across the desk, hitting the nameplate square in the center like a spotlight. Vera Monroe. Etched, permanent, no longer borrowed. On the shelf behind me was a framed photo, not of me or Delaney, but of our original team, back when we sat in a garage with whiteboards and post-its and dreams too big for our zip code. I reached out and turned the frame slightly, so it faced the room. Moments later, Ruthie entered without knocking, a folder in one hand and a paper cup in the other. Press wants a quote, she said. The board just finalized a release. I took the paper from her and scanned the headline. Reynolds Holdings welcomes back founder. New era begins. I folded the page in half and set it aside. It was never about the press. Ruthie smiled, not pushing further. She placed the coffee down and leaned against the wall. You ever gonna go back to the house? I shook my head once. Too many ghosts in those walls, and not the kind you can clean out with bleach. Neither of us said anything for a while. The quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Later that afternoon, I checked my voicemail, though I already knew I shouldn't have. Sure enough, one new message. Delaney. Her voice was calm, too calm. You left me no choice, she said. You made me feel small. What else was I supposed to do? I didn't finish the message. I didn't need to. The absence of remorse stung deeper than any insult ever could. She hadn't learned. She hadn't broken. She'd just reshaped the lie in a new container. But that was no longer my burden to carry. I deleted it and placed my phone face down on the desk. That evening, I passed a junior designer in the hallway. She looked maybe 24, still gripping a sketch pad like it was armor. She stopped me shyly. Ma'am, she said, then faltered. I just wanted to thank you for what you said in the town hall last month about making space. I offered a small smile. You don't have to earn space, I told her. You just have to claim it. She blinked, surprised, then nodded and walked on. Back in my office, I opened a long-forgotten drawer and found an old sketch, a logo I'd drafted in the early days. Delaney once said it was too subtle to be memorable. I pinned it on the corkboard beside my desk. Subtle, I murmured, is sometimes the loudest thing in the room. Before closing up for the night, I received a ping from Ruthie. You might want to see this, the text read, a link to a podcast. Delaney's voice came through before I even clicked play. I was misunderstood. I was doing what I thought was best for the company and our family. I paused it halfway through. I didn't need to hear the ending. Ruthie appeared in my doorway just as I closed the browser. You're not going to respond? She asked, arms folded. No, I said. Some people need the last word. I don't. The following week, I walked into the company's all-hands town hall. This time not as a ghost, not as a legend others whispered about, but as a leader who had earned every scar. There was no fanfare, no dramatic music, just a quiet stillness before I spoke. If you ever feel like no one sees you, I said, just remember, not being seen doesn't mean you don't matter. It just means it's not your time yet. The applause came like a wave, warm, honest, real, but I didn't let it linger too long. I nodded, stepped back, and let the next voice take the floor. I hadn't come back to be worshipped. I came back to end a chapter, and begin one that finally belonged to me. There's something about silence that teaches you more than applause ever could. For so long, I confused being quiet with being weak. But strength doesn't always look like shouting. It can look like standing your ground when the world wants to erase you. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't need permission to matter. You don't need anyone's approval to reclaim your name, your worth, or your story. Whether it's family, work, or life itself, don't wait to be invited. Build your own door, walk through it, and close it behind you if you must. I know I'm not the only one who's felt overlooked or underestimated. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up? Have you ever had to fight quietly for something that was already yours? If this story spoke to you, even a little, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me what city or state you're watching from. And if it didn't hit home, that's okay too. Let me know why and how I can do better next time. If you found something in this video that made you feel seen, inspired, or even a little stronger, please hit that subscribe button. We've got more real stories to share. Stories that heal. Stories that empower. Thanks for walking through this chapter with me. And remember, just because they tried to erase you doesn't mean you disappeared. Hi, I'm Noelle. This morning, my sister stepped out of a white SUV, tossed her coffee, and it landed all over me. She didn't apologize. She didn't even recognize me. She walked into my hotel like she owned the place. But then, her fiancé looked me dead in the eye and called me boss. They say family's supposed to know you best. But what happens when they pretend you don't exist until they need something? What if the sister who used to mock your dreams now works under your name and still doesn't say thank you? Is it really revenge if I never said a word? Or is silence just louder when you've built the room they're standing in? The rain had barely stopped, but the sky still looked like it hadn't made up its mind. I stepped out of my car quietly, closing the door with just enough force to remind myself I was still here. Alive. Standing in front of the hotel that bore my mother's name, but not my own. My heels clicked against the slick pavement. A valet dashed by me with an umbrella, offering it to a couple climbing out of a Tesla. He didn't even glance at me. I didn't expect him to. That was part of the deal. When you decide not to put your face on the plaque or your name on the press releases, people forget you own the floor they're standing on. I paused by the staff entrance. Through the tinted glass, I could see the morning crew buzzing, resetting the breakfast area, fluffing throw pillows like it was some kind of ritual. No one looked up. I didn't take it personally. I hadn't worn a name tag in 3 years. I didn't need one. My authority wasn't in print. It was in the decisions no one noticed until something broke. I reached for the handle, then stopped. A low hum rose from the street. A white SUV rounded the corner fast. Tires hissed against leftover puddles. The driver didn't slow down. I took half a step back, instinctual. Too late. Coffee. No. Mud. A splash of both. The cup must have been resting in the side holder, tilted just enough. It flew through the window as it rolled down, flung in a careless arc. And it hit me. Coat. Pants. Bag. Delara. She stepped out of the SUV like it was a stage. Hair curled to perfection, blazer cinched tight at the waist, heels sharp enough to slice through someone's pride. She didn't see me, not really. She looked at me, sure, but not in a way that made her stop. Not in a way that said, "You're familiar." "Watch where you stand," she muttered, brushing past like I was blocking her spotlight. She didn't stop walking, didn't say sorry, didn't even glance at the mud dripping down my sleeves. I stood there, soaked. Coat sticking to my arms, purse ruined. A valet whistled under his breath as he passed me. I could have said something. I didn't. I didn't cry either. Instead, I walked in behind her. The hotel lobby glowed like it always did at this hour. Gold-tinted sconces, fresh orchids, music low and safe. She was already striding past the front desk, giving the concierge a nod like she owned the place. He smiled at her like she was royalty. Then his eyes flicked to me and darted away. She turned just as we passed each other. "Excuse me," she said flatly, brushing my shoulder. That's when it hit me harder than the coffee ever could. She didn't know. Delara Kincaid didn't recognize her own sister. I stepped back. Let her pass. Let her own that space the way she always had. Let her walk deeper into the hotel, my hotel, with the same ease she walked all over people's boundaries. She made it to the elevator before Thatcher caught up to her. I hadn't seen him since their engagement was announced on every platform known to man. Smiling with his arm draped around her waist, like he had no idea who she used to be. But when he saw me, his steps faltered. His smile shifted, tightened. He nodded. "Good morning, Ms. Hoyt," he said gently. "Will you be joining us upstairs, boss?" He said it cleanly, loud enough. Delara stopped cold. She turned. "Wait. Boss?" Our eyes locked. And still, no recognition. But this time, I saw something else in her face. Not confusion, fear. She blinked just once, but it was enough. That kind of blinking. The kind that happens when someone's brain needs to rearrange itself around a truth they didn't see coming. I didn't wait for her to speak. I stepped away from the elevator bank, nodded politely at Thatcher, and made my way toward the back corridor where the executive suite access sat locked behind a keypad no one else on the floor could open without my code. It wasn't until I reached the security lounge in the basement, where the smell of hot coffee mixed with bleach and silence, that I let myself breathe again. Marcus looked up from the monitor wall. He tapped a pen against his notepad, eyes still scanning the feeds. "She give you trouble?" "No," I said, slipping off my blazer. "She gave me clarity." He turned his chair halfway toward me. "You want me to tag her entry logs for the next few days?" I shook my head. Let her feel comfortable. Let her think she still belongs. He studied me for a second, like he wanted to say more, but thought better of it. That's what I liked about Marcus. He knew when silence held more weight than support. Upstairs, I could see her through the camera. Delara, sitting in the atrium, champagne in hand, legs crossed like the whole place was her living room. 2 PR girls flanked her. One handed her a small white box, probably a media gift. The other leaned in, whispering something with a little too much laughter. Delara threw her head back, showy, calculated, empty. She still didn't know, and everyone around her still believed she ran the room. I left the lounge and headed back toward the front hall. On my way up, I paused at the mirror by the west stairwell. The mud was gone. I'd scrubbed it off, changed coats, but the look on her face still clung to me. Fear. She recognized the shift, even if not the source. I passed the concierge desk again. A couple was checking in, a woman with a leopard print umbrella and her husband, who asked for a room with a mountain view. Behind them, Delara was in conversation with the lobby manager, complimenting the floral arrangements like she'd picked them herself. I kept walking. She didn't notice me this time. That's when the absurdity hit me. She had just walked into a building I bought, stood on carpet I selected, sipped from glasses I approved, and never paused to wonder how it all came to be. And the SUV she climbed out of? I knew that car. Not just the model or the make. The actual vehicle. 3 years ago, I was still doing weekend cleaning jobs. That car had come in with mud-caked rims, and the woman behind the wheel, Delara, had dropped the keys without looking up. "I'm late for brunch. Don't scratch it." Those were her words. I'd spent nearly an hour detailing the inside, removing makeup stains from the visor, brushing breadcrumbs from the leather seats, polishing perfume smears off the gearshift. She didn't tip, didn't even say thank you. I remember her posting a photo later that same day, sitting cross-legged on some patio, captioned, "Hustle is in my blood." The memory made me want to laugh and ache at the same time. Back in my office, I opened the drawer on the right side of the desk and pulled out the file labeled Maribel Hoyt Trust. Inside was the deed. The original one, signed, notarized, sealed. It didn't bear my first name. I hadn't wanted it to. Putting Noelle Kincaid on the paperwork would have created noise. Questions, headlines, people who would try to twist it into some kind of redemption arc. I didn't want redemption. I wanted the work to speak louder than the past. So I used hers. My mother's. Maribel. She never had luxury, never had the chance to sit in a lobby like this one. But she'd taught me what hospitality meant. Clean floors, warm greetings, staying late even when no one said thank you. This place was hers more than it was ever mine. I'd named the holding company after her. I'd built the structure around her values, and I'd buried my ego under every square foot of tile. Not because I was hiding, but because I wanted to build something I didn't need applause for. There was a knock on the glass. Marcus again. He held up a tablet. "You'll want to see this." On screen, Delara. She was upstairs now, giving a tour to two women from a startup magazine, smiling like she'd been invited, talking like she'd booked the space. I leaned back in my chair. Let her enjoy it. Let her soak in a moment she thought she owned. But I knew something she didn't. People always remember who walks into a room loud, but they never forget who walks out holding the keys. I stayed in my office for a while after Marcus left, just staring at the screens. Delara floated through the building like she belonged to it. Her movements were smooth, curated. She knew exactly which side to tilt her head for the camera, exactly how to hold her flute of champagne to look casual but expensive. It should have bothered me more. Maybe a few years ago it would have. But now, I just felt removed, detached in the way you get when someone says your name wrong one too many times and you stop correcting them. I needed to move. Sitting still made it worse. I grabbed the key ring from my drawer and headed out through the side exit, avoiding the lobby altogether. There's a narrow marble staircase at the far end of the West Wing. No signage, no carpet, no elevator access. Guests never use it. It leads to a storage landing now converted into a plant room for the rooftop garden. I climbed it slowly. Each step echoed in that hollow way old buildings hum when they think you're alone. My fingers trailed the railing. I'd had it restored last year, kept the original wood instead of switching to stainless steel. I liked the imperfections, the scratch marks, the shallow grooves where hands used to grip it in different eras. That railing had witnessed more truths than any security feed ever could. That staircase used to go nowhere. It was a leftover from the hotel's original layout, a forgotten shaft between two floors. When I took over, I had the wall knocked out and gave it a purpose. Quiet. Hidden. Necessary. That was the first thing I ever redesigned here, and I never told anyone. I stopped on the top step and closed my eyes. The air smelled faintly of lavender. Ms. Nadine, our overnight manager, must have set the diffusers again. But scent wasn't what stirred the memory. It was the sound, laughter, faint, tinny, echoing down the hallway from someone watching a video on their phone. And just like that, I was 17 again. Sitting under the maple tree in our backyard, sketchpad on my knees, drawing floor plans like they were blueprints to a life that hadn't rejected me yet. We were having a barbecue. Delara was showing off her new haircut. Dad had bought matching steaks for the men and burnt veggie burgers for everyone else. I was sketching the front desk of an imaginary hotel. Delara leaned over my shoulder and laughed, not just at the drawing, but loud enough to pull attention from everyone near the grill. "A hotel? With what money, Nolly? Please, you'll be folding napkins at someone else's check-in desk." A few people chuckled. Not cruelly, just socially. You know the kind. People who laugh because it's easier than being the only one who doesn't. I didn't say anything. I didn't cry. But I remember folding that sketch into 4 perfect squares that night and shoving it into the fireplace before anyone saw it again. I still remember the sound it made as it burned, like it was glad to be gone. And that wasn't even the worst of it. There was the Christmas photo. I was maybe 12, Delara 15. Mom had everyone dressed in matching red. White fireplace behind us, snow falling just right. Except I wasn't in the photo. I'd gone outside for 2 minutes to grab my boots from the back porch. When I came back, the picture had already been taken. "You had mud on your pants," Mom said. "We couldn't wait forever." Delara had been the one to shut the door behind me. That photo still sits in a silver frame on our parents' bookshelf. No one notices who's missing. They just say, "What a perfect moment." And then there were the letters. I didn't even know they existed until a year after high school. Ms. Ramos, my guidance counselor, ran into me at a gas station just outside of Tacoma. I was working 2 jobs, still trying to figure out how to afford a single community college class. She looked genuinely confused. "I never heard back from you," she said. "You got into 2 programs. We mailed the packets." I blinked. "What packets?" She described them. envelopes with school seals, brochures, financial aid info. She even remembered I'd qualified for partial grants. The mail that week had been Delara's job. I'd had finals. I was barely sleeping. She'd picked everything up and tossed what she didn't want to carry. "I figured it was junk from schools you couldn't afford anyway," she said a month later, like it meant nothing. She admitted it, casually, with a shrug. No apology, no guilt, just, "What was I supposed to do? You didn't even know they came." She was right. I didn't. That memory had been buried under a dozen others like it, but it surfaced now with the clarity only silence can bring. Not the scream kind, the type that settles into your bones and changes the way you stand. Back in my office, I opened a drawer and pulled out a shoebox I kept hidden under files. Inside was a faded photo, not the Christmas one, not the barbecue. This one was taken at my cousin's wedding. Someone else had snapped it by accident. I was standing at the edge of the group, slightly turned away from the camera. Delara was front and center. The rest of the family formed a semicircle around her like she was the sun. I was there, just barely. My smile was small, measured, not fake, not full. I held the photo for a long time. I wasn't invisible. I just learned how to stand where no one looked. I tucked the photo back into the shoebox and slid it beneath the stack of old financial records. The kind of records no one ever asks to see unless they're trying to figure out where something went wrong. I pressed the drawer shut with the side of my hand and stood up slowly, my knees aching a little more than I cared to admit. Outside the office, the hallway was quiet. Not silent, just that kind of muffled quiet that comes when people are trying not to be obvious about what they're whispering, the kind that pretends not to know. I made my way toward the staff stairwell, thinking I'd take the back way up to the rooftop for air. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. The name flashing across the screen wasn't a surprise. Aunt Rebecca. Her message came in quick taps. "Noelle, please don't make this into a thing." I didn't reply. Then a second message. "She didn't mean it. Don't ruin her moment." I stared at it for a few seconds, thumb hovering, then let the screen go dark. I turned the phone over in my hand and placed it face down on the windowsill beside the stairwell door. It felt better out of reach. It wasn't the first time someone asked me to stay quiet so someone else could shine. I continued up the stairs. Halfway through, another message arrived. This one from Cousin Graham, who I hadn't heard from since Mom's funeral. "Family First Group is planning something special for Delara's engagement. You'll be proud of what we've put together." I blinked. Family First? I hadn't heard of any group chat. Moments later, a notification popped up from my assistant, Lacey. It was a forwarded screenshot, a thread, a group chat. Family First. All my relatives, all the people I'd once held my breath around at reunions, talking about Delara's engagement, gushing about the venue, the florals, the cocktails, the perfect rooftop for a sunset proposal pic. My hotel. Every line of that thread burned slow. Noelle doesn't even like being on camera. We should keep it Delara only for press shots. Can we ask her to enter from the side so she's not in background frames? I closed the file and sat down on the bottom stair. Not in background frames. I had to read that twice to believe it. Then I laughed, short, not loud enough to echo. I took a screenshot of the whole thing and texted it back to Lacey. Cancel their reservation. Use the usual phrasing. I don't care what excuse. I didn't explain. She wouldn't need one. Upstairs, I could hear the soft murmur of guests settling into early dinner reservations. Someone's heels clicked across the upper landing. I didn't look up. I didn't need to know who it was. I'd already learned the pattern of footsteps that moved like they were born to be seen. Delara's digital fingerprint was everywhere. Her Instagram pinged a new post a few minutes later. Couldn't do this without my family. Grateful to the ones who've stood by me from day one. Photo, her fiancé, our parents, champagne glasses raised, sunset behind them. I pinched the image to zoom in. No tags, no captioned names, no trace of me. But that wasn't the part that stunned me. It was the background, my hotel lobby, down to the gold-rimmed vases I'd had custom designed from a local Seattle artisan. And there was Lacey, out of focus, mid-step, walking behind the front desk. I wasn't in the picture, but the details were all mine. Every inch she used to shape her image had my fingerprints embedded in the seams, and she never once acknowledged it. It didn't even hurt anymore. It just confirmed what I'd been too polite to say aloud for years. Delara didn't forget to include me. She deliberately edited me out. I stood up, tucked my phone into my coat, and walked back toward the hallway. That kind of exclusion isn't an accident. It's a tactic. It's what people use when they want to erase you without looking like they're trying. I passed the banquet team reviewing the week's setup schedule and nodded to them on my way through. They nodded back like nothing was out of place, like my last name wasn't being scrolled through hundreds of devices while simultaneously scrubbed off the guest list. Just before I reached the elevator, I deleted the thread. Every message, every screenshot. Then, I opened Delara's profile, hovered over the following tab, and tapped unfollow. I wasn't angry. I was done. As the elevator doors slid open, I looked up, and there he was. Thatcher. He didn't look shocked to see me. He didn't look awkward either. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. He looked at me, not like a man confused, but like someone who had finally put two and two together. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the elevator, like he'd been waiting for me, not impatiently, but with a kind of quiet certainty I didn't expect. I stepped in beside him without speaking. The doors closed, floor 10 lit up. He finally said, "You changed your hair." "People do that," I said. He nodded, eyes ahead. "I figured it out last night," he added, almost under his breath. "Your last name. The way you move through the building, no one looks at you like they're waiting for you to leave." That was true. I'd built it that way. He turned his head slightly toward me. "You're the one who trained me. You corrected every draft I sent for 3 months straight. You once made me rewrite a welcome card 3 times because I put 'enjoy your stay' in lowercase." I remembered that. I also remembered him thanking me after shift, every single night. "You handed me my first real paycheck," he said. "You signed it, Maribel Hoyt." We reached the rooftop. The air hit us immediately, cool, damp, thick with salt from Puget Sound. The kind of morning that felt like a breath held too long. He walked to the railing, hands tucked in the pockets of his blazer. I stayed by the door. "I asked Delara last week if she had siblings," he said without looking at me. "She said no." That didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how steady his voice was when he said it. "She lied," I said flatly. "She did," he nodded. "But you didn't correct her. You didn't say a word." "I've learned that saying less keeps things cleaner." He turned back toward me then. "But why let her humiliate you like that? In front of people? On your own sidewalk?" "She's been doing it since we were kids," I said. This time, at least, I had dry shoes and a deed in my desk. He smiled, only slightly. Not mockingly. Just enough to say he understood more than he let on. We stayed there for another minute before he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "A friend of mine, Julia, was at a brunch a few weeks ago," he said. "Delara didn't realize they knew each other." He opened a file, pressed play. Delara's voice poured out, recorded over the clink of silverware and shallow background laughter. "Noelle, that girl's probably mopping hotel bathrooms somewhere. She never had any presence. She fades. Always has." My jaw tightened, not because of the words, but because of how easily they came out of her mouth. Thatcher paused the audio. "I figured you should hear it from her." I didn't answer. He tucked the phone away again, not needing to make a show of it. "She acts like you're a ghost," he said. "She prefers the version of me that doesn't speak," I replied. "Maybe," he said, "but ghosts don't leave footprints." I didn't expect that. The sun was beginning to burn off the fog. I nodded once toward the elevator. Come with me. We rode down in silence. I led him past the main lobby, through a set of private doors most guests don't even know exist. At the end of the corridor was my office. Discreet, functional, nothing extravagant. I opened the drawer to the left of my chair and pulled out the documents. I laid them flat on the desk. Transfer of ownership, I said. Full trust inherited under my mother's name. Hotel registered under the Marable Hoyt Holding Company. He read it quietly. Didn't rush. When he looked up, I added, Delara always assumed she'd get everything just by showing up, but no one ever told her she had to earn it. He ran his finger along the edge of the paper. She doesn't even know this exists, does she? She wouldn't recognize it if it were framed in front of her. He leaned back, arms folded now. And you've just let her walk around here, taking up space? She's taken space her whole life. I just stopped stepping aside for it. There was a pause. A long one. The kind that says more than whatever's coming next. Then I said it. You're marrying someone who lied to you about having a sister. What else do you think she's not saying? He didn't flinch, but I saw it. That flicker in his eyes. Not because I accused her, but because he knew I hadn't lied. The pause between us didn't last long. He gave a subtle nod, as if to say, You don't have to explain anything else, and stepped aside. I walked past Thatcher without a word, without a glance, and took the long hallway back toward the executive wing. I knew what was waiting before I reached the double doors. Delara. She stood near the concierge desk like someone forced to wait in a line she thought she'd skip. Her arms were folded tight, her mouth pressed thin. A few hotel guests glanced her way, sensing tension, even if they didn't know its name. The moment our eyes met, she pushed off the wall. You work here? Her voice wasn't curious. It was coated in that familiar cocktail of disbelief and disdain. Before I could answer, Thatcher stepped in from behind her. She doesn't work here, he said calmly. She owns this building. Silence cracked across the marble like a dropped glass. The concierge froze mid-swipe of a room card. One of the bellhops looked up from his cart. Even the piano music from the lobby system seemed to stumble over its own notes. Delara's head turned slowly toward me, searching for something in my face she had clearly never bothered to look for. I didn't give her a smile. I didn't offer a hand. I just waited. I need to talk to you, she muttered, eyes darting at the small crowd that had gathered at a distance. I didn't respond. I simply pivoted and began walking. She followed. We moved through the hallway, past framed photographs of the hotel's restoration, down the quiet corridor that led to the executive offices. Her heels clicked behind me like she was trying to catch up to her own story. When we reached the end of the hall, I pushed open the door to my office and stepped inside. She followed, breath uneven. Why didn't you tell me? She said before I'd even closed the door. I turned slowly to face her. Because you never asked. You made me look like a damn fool, she snapped, arms flailing slightly now. No, I said evenly. You did that by talking before you understood who you were talking to. She blinked, furious. You're just going to stand there and act like you didn't set me up? You set yourself up, Delara. I didn't hide behind sunglasses. I didn't throw coffee. I didn't lie to my fiancé about having a sister. That landed. I watched it hit her like a quiet thud against glass. No crash, just the dull realization that the reflection she'd built was cracking. She sat down without asking, gripping the armrest like it would keep her balanced. I was embarrassed, she finally said. You always made me feel small. I leaned forward slightly. No, I just never played along when you tried to act bigger than you were. She looked up at me, wounded. You really won't forgive me? I took a deep breath and let the words sit before I said them. Forgiveness is not a discount code I hand out to people who call me invisible and then want to skip the checkout line. You haven't earned it, and I'm not interested in pretending you have. She stood, pacing now. So what, you just want me to grovel? I don't want anything from you, I said. But I also won't let you rewrite the story just because the ending isn't flattering. Delara stopped at the edge of my desk. Then why let me in at all? I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a small envelope. Because I don't want to become like you. She frowned. I handed her the envelope. This is a contact, someone in Chicago who works with public figures to rebrand after mistakes. They're discreet, they're good. You'll need them. Her hands trembled slightly as she took it. As she looked down at the envelope, I reached into the top drawer and pulled out a letter. Handwritten, faded, the ink barely visible in places. Mom's handwriting. I slid it across the desk. You may want to read this too. She picked it up, carefully unfolding the lined paper like it might fall apart in her hands. It read, If they ever force you to choose, I hope they choose you, Noelle. Because I did. Always did. Even when I didn't say it out loud. Delara didn't speak for a long time. When she finally looked up, there was no anger, no spin, no mask. Just someone who hadn't realized until too late that the stage she thought she was standing on had been built by someone else. Behind her, at the door, stood Ms. Abrams, her best friend, the one who'd been at every party, every campaign, every curated shoot. She didn't say a word, but she met my eyes, and in a voice softer than I'd ever heard from her, she said, I wish I'd known. Delara started to speak. I raised my hand gently. You don't need to say anything else. She hesitated, then left, and I didn't watch her go. After Delara left my office, I stayed for a few minutes, letting the room settle. The letter from my mother still lay open on the desk, and the silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was whole. I turned off the overhead light, closed the door gently behind me, and walked toward the service hallway. On my way down to the control room, I passed a housekeeper prepping for the evening shift. She offered me a nod, no words. That small gesture meant more than a dozen press quotes ever could. Marcus was already seated at the desk when I entered the security lounge, eyes locked on the main screen. His hand hovered over the pause button. You're gonna want to see this, he said, not taking his eyes off the monitor. I stepped behind him just as he hit play. It was footage from 2 days ago, pulled from the front entrance feed. Delara, exiting her white SUV, sunglasses on, spilling coffee, onto me. The camera angle caught the whole thing, her wave to the cameras, the dismissive flick of her wrist, and my reaction. Or lack of one. It was already making the rounds online. 42,000 views and climbing. I didn't have to read the comments to guess their tone. One of the headlines flashing in the corner read, Influencer or Insulter, Seattle's darling caught in hotel scandal. Another, the hotel owner she didn't recognize. I didn't speak. Neither did Marcus. He just muted the video and turned to me. This doesn't look like it's slowing down. I nodded once. Let it run. A few hours later, I found myself standing behind a divider in the main event space, where Delara had insisted on holding her engagement press briefing. Originally, she'd planned to announce a joint project, something involving Thatcher and a handful of investors she'd carefully curated. I wasn't invited to speak. I wasn't even supposed to be there. But I watched. Thatcher stood to the left of the podium, hands folded, jaw tense. Delara stepped forward in a tailored cream pantsuit, hair done, makeup camera ready. But she looked wrong. Not tired, not messy, just off. The kind of off you can't fix with filters. A reporter near the front raised a hand. Ms. Kincaid, before we begin, do you care to comment on the video circulating online this morning? Delara froze. Another voice followed immediately. Is it true you mistook your own sister for hotel staff and publicly humiliated her? The air thinned. She blinked rapidly. I didn't know she... Thatcher cleared his throat. She turned toward him, eyes pleading, but he stepped up to the microphone. I'd like to say something, he began, voice steady, measured. He didn't look at her. There are principles I live by. Things I was taught as a kid, not in school or by PR teams, but at dinner tables and in the quiet of watching how people treat each other. He paused. One of those is this. Character shows up when no one's watching, but it also shows up when everyone is. He finally looked at her. And there are people I've come to admire. Not for what they post, but for what they protect, even in silence. Then he turned back to the crowd. We won't be moving forward with the engagement or the partnership. I wish her well. And he walked off the stage. The silence that followed was stunning. No gasp, no camera clicks, just the dull buzz of a system failing to load. I left before Delara could look for me. Back in my office, I checked my inbox. There were 5 emails from brand sponsors suspending contracts with her, 3 from companies cutting ties, 1 from her condo board initiating foreclosure proceedings. The fall didn't come like thunder. It came like soft, repeated taps against glass. Quiet, relentless, final. Lacey knocked once, then entered with her tablet. They're tagging you in clips now. Some media outlets are calling you the sister that built the stage. Want me to flag them? I shook my head. No, let them run it. Even the one she just posted, she tagged you in a photo. My eyes narrowed. She tagged me? Lacey nodded. I picked up my phone. The notification was there, glowing. Delara Kincaid tagged you in a post. I stared at it. Didn't open it. Didn't need to. And then I deleted it. I left the office early the next morning, before most of the staff arrived. The sun hadn't cleared the skyline yet, and the city sat in a kind of hushed gray. On my way through the garden terrace, I noticed the gate had been unlatched. That wasn't normal. Maintenance always kept it secure overnight. She was sitting on the stone bench beneath the arbor, legs pulled up close to her body, like a child who didn't know how else to shrink. No makeup, no shoes. She wasn't crying, she was just still. I stopped a few steps away. I don't have anywhere else to go, Delara said without looking at me. I didn't rush to respond, didn't soften. I just stood there, letting her words hang. There's a cot in the wellness suite, I finally said. You can use it for 2 nights. She nodded once, eyes fixed on the damp brick at her feet. We didn't talk on the way back inside. I walked ahead, not out of cruelty, but because I wasn't sure if I could stand next to her without saying something I'd regret. Some silences aren't cold. They're earned. By mid-morning, we crossed paths again near the glass hallway that overlooked the lower courtyard. She was leaning on the railing, staring at the koi pond like it might offer an escape plan. I didn't remember saying those things about you, she said as I passed. I stopped. That doesn't mean you didn't say them, I replied calmly. Delara turned toward me, a little too quickly. Are we okay? We're not enemies, I said, but don't confuse this with closeness. She flinched at that. Not visibly, but something in her chest dropped. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, then closed it again. I kept walking. That evening was the gala. It had been planned months ago, an anniversary celebration for the hotel's renovation. A few hundred people filled the ballroom, staff in sharp uniforms, lighting just dim enough to make everything feel elegant but not theatrical. I stood behind the curtain for a moment before they called me up. Lacey handed me the notes I wouldn't read. You ready? She asked. I nodded. As I walked onto the stage, I heard someone whisper, That's her. I didn't look to see who it was. I reached the podium and let the crowd quiet themselves. Some people think dignity is about keeping quiet, I began. Others think it's about being seen. I think it's about knowing when to speak and when not to. That wasn't on the cards. But it was what I meant. I want to thank the people who show up on time, stay late, and never ask for applause. You're the reason this place breathes. I never said Delara's name. I never needed to. People knew. They always do, eventually. After the applause, I walked off the stage and took the side route toward the staff wing. The back hallway always felt more honest. I stopped by the locker room on my way out. Delara had been given a temporary locker to store her things. It sat on the bottom row, near the old vending machine that only took quarters. I pulled a small envelope from my coat pocket. Inside was a card with the name of someone I trusted, an image consultant who worked quietly with women rebuilding their public lives after scandal. No strings, no notes, just one line I'd written across the flap. Do something new, with less damage this time. I slipped it into the locker, closed the door, and left. Outside, the wind had picked up. The air smelled like rain before it begins. I walked toward the front garden, the kind guests rarely noticed. By the time I reached the sidewalk, the drizzle had turned steady. I didn't pull my coat over my head. I didn't rush. I let the rain touch me, slow, soft, real. Just enough to remember I was still alive. The rain let up sometime during the night. By sunrise, only thin beads of water clung to the edges of the rooftop garden chairs, catching the first bits of light like scattered glass. I brought my tea with me, the cup wrapped in both hands, more for comfort than warmth. I set it on the stone table beside the chair no one sat in anymore. It had been my mother's favorite spot. She never said it out loud, but I knew. She always took this chair when she came to visit. Legs crossed, eyes forward, coffee black. Never asked for company, never offered advice. But she listened. Some mornings, I still imagine her here. Not a ghost, just a presence. Not watching me, just witnessing. The city below moved on, same as ever. Cars slid past traffic lights like clockwork. Vendors set up under half-unfolded awnings. Someone down the block was already arguing about a parking meter. But up here, it was quiet. Peace doesn't make noise. It just waits until you're ready to recognize it. I stayed until the wind picked up, then carried my cup down the service stairwell and slipped into the hallway behind the admin wing. It was just past 8 a.m., the hour when people stopped yawning and started pretending they weren't tired. In the lobby, I paused behind a column, just for a moment. Delara stood behind the front desk. No heels, just flats. Her blazer was simple, hair pulled back, no lipstick, no assistant. She handed a guest their key card, offered a small smile, and turned to adjust something on the screen. She didn't see me. I didn't let her. I didn't need her to. Some might have called it punishment. That she'd been given a basic desk job, that the world she built on aesthetics and applause had crumbled down into something unphotographed. But I didn't see shame in it. I saw something closer to reality. And maybe that was more generous than any apology she could have offered. Back in my office, I opened the last drawer on the right and took out a thank you card for a vendor I'd worked with since before the rebranding. Handwritten, as always. Underneath the card, I slipped in a folded sheet. Just a few words. Not for them. For me. Blood doesn't always mean family, but dignity means knowing when to leave a room and when to build one of your own. I sealed it, labeled it, moved on. Later that afternoon, I passed Thatcher in the hallway near guest services. We didn't stop, we didn't slow. But he noticed me. "Glad to see you smile," he said, quiet, not fishing. "I'm still learning how," I replied. That was the end of it. No open wounds, no rehashing. He kept walking. So did I. That evening, as I did final rounds before leaving for the night, I paused once more at the garden gate. A breeze moved through the trees, cool and light. Inside, things still needed attention. A leaking faucet on the third floor. An overbooked vendor for the weekend's brunch series. A staff member who wanted reduced hours. The world kept spinning, unbothered. But I knew something now I didn't before. I hadn't been erased. I had simply outgrown the frame they tried to fit me in, and I didn't need their spotlight to see myself clearly anymore. The last door I closed that night wasn't the one to my office. It was the one to needing their approval ever again.